Hey, how's it going, everybody? Sarasota Tim. Hey, welcome to Evening Chat, and I hope you enjoyed this video tonight. I was kind of thinking about, what in the world could we talk about? And I had some ideas a few times about sharing on my YouTube channel about my life, but I thought, it's kind of corny, or, maybe I shouldn't reveal so much, or maybe people wouldn't be interested or whatever. But since I don't have much else, and since we were just talking about how it was in the 50s and the 60s and then in the 70s, and that's when it seemed like most of you out there, a lot of you have fond memories of growing up in the 70s as well. Now, I want to talk about my personal experiences, not just what I gleaned on the internet of the inventions or the things that started happening and what, homes cost and all that. That's all very interesting. It really is, compared to today. But let's go back. So in the 70s, I was a very young person in high school. I didn't grow up in the 70s as a young adult. I grew up in the 80s as a young adult. I was class of 77. I should have been class of 76, but I was held back a year when I was in the first grade because I didn't know my colors yet. I'm serious. We moved around a lot or whatever, and they didn't feel that I, knew how to stand in line right and knew all my colors. So I had to repeat the first grade. They don't fail kids today. It doesn't matter how bad you are. They just push you right on through the education system. So because I repeated the first grade and really got my colors down, that's why I turned out to be so smart. All kidding aside, though, that's really what happened. Apparently, we moved when the rent came due, and we were poor white people. And so I was held back in the first grade. So I was class of 77. Which makes me, 16, 17 years old around that age. I guess you're supposed to be 18 when you graduate high school. Yeah. So I was class of 77, but you ready for this? This is why I thought it might be kind of corny to share, but hey, what do I care? What do I care? So in my sophomore year, which is 10th grade, I should have been the 11th, but I was in the 10th, and I was 16 years old. And just before school was to finish and break for the summer, and I was going to go into the 11th grade, a junior, I decided to bail and go to California back to my mom from my father's house. So what happened was I was living in California when I was in the 5th grade or 6th grade, and then I came to Florida to live with my biological father. I got a stepfather, my real father, and I went to junior high school, which was 7 and 8. We had junior high in those days. I think they call it middle school now. So I did go to 7 and 8. And then I went to 9 and 10. So I spent 4 years living in Lake Worth, Florida. Went to Lake Worth Junior High, and I went to Lake Worth High School. In that 4 years that I lived there, prior to coming there to live with my father, who did not raise me, my mom and him divorced when I was like 5. And so I was basically raised by a stepfather until the time of which I wanted to move back to Florida with my real father. What happened was I think I turned 13, and when I became a teenager, I told my mom that, I'd like to live with my dad now. And my dad was more of an affluent, he had money, he owned his home, and my mother, when I grew up with her, it was a very poor family scene. We moved a lot. Nobody owned anything, kind of like I am now. But in all seriousness, that's what it was. And my mom and my stepfather had split. So now I'm just living at home with a brother and my mom. I have a brother, and I have no idea where he is. He's been in trouble since he could crawl. And I've got brothers and sisters that are from when my mom remarried and when my father remarried. I'm losing you already, right? That's why when I started telling this story, they're like, I told it to one friend of mine in Georgia, this old Southern guy. He's very cool. God rest his soul. He's like, that's good, Tim. That's good. Because most people, you know, they grew up in the same home, the same town, the same parents. Not everybody, but mostly, I would think. And so, anyway, because my mother and my father remarried multiple times, yeah, multiple times, and had kids, I had these halves and three quarters and fractions of siblings, of which were on the other side of the country, because when my parents separated, one did kind of go to California and one kind of stayed in Georgia, South Carolina, somewhere. And my father, he's the one that remarried more times than my mother. And he had children from each one of his wives. And so they're not stepbrothers and sisters, they're half. That we have the same father, and some of my siblings, I have the same mother. But the one brother I have, who's been in trouble his entire life, he, I don't know where he is. I really don't. We fell out a long time ago, and I'm the eldest. But I've always seemed to kind of keep my nose clean. I've never had any run-ins with the law. I've never been in jail. I've never done anything, anything like that, ever. The only thing I wanted to do, since I could crawl, and since my stepfather used to take me to work with him to set tile, and I would carry water in a paint bucket, and I'd wash his tools, and he'd be sitting on the side of a tub racking tile on the wall. We called it mud jobs. They didn't have mastic in those days where you just put glue on the wall and stick it on. We floated off the wall with mortar, straight edges and strips, and we carried lime and cement and sand in the back of his truck, and a big thing, a mortar box, looked like a boat, and we would just hoe this mix back and forth. I'd go get water, seemed like for an hour, and this cement would kept absorbing it, and we'd hoe it back and forth until it would mix and make this mud. And I'm getting on a different tangent, but anyway, I learned how to be a man. He put money in my pocket. He gave me a wallet. He taught me respect. He snatched a knot in my tail when I needed it, meaning I got my ass whooped with a belt. And I esteem him, God rest his soul. Both my stepfather and my father have gone on to be with the Lord. I count him as my father because really he raised me and treated me like his own. He really did. More than he did my brother, because my brother was like this little outcast, black sheep in the family. So after I had worked with my stepfather and kind of learned a lot of maturity, I'm talking about when I was out of school in the summer, and I'm 5 years old going to work with him when I wasn't going to school. So when I got to be about 12 and 13 and 11 is when I had paper routes. I was going door to door asking people to take the paper. I was going out there at 3 a.m. dropping papers off at 12 years old on a bicycle with all the papers stuffed in a poncho. You've seen them back in the day. And then I would go collect the money once a month from everybody. So I was becoming like a businessman, a salesman, and I had this drive where I went out and knocked on doors. From a, it's hard for me to even say I was that young, but that's how old I was, because when I was, I think maybe 14, is when I came to Florida to live with my real father. So, but going back to when I was with my mother after my stepfather left and they went their own ways, I was just there alone and I didn't have that father, and she was just sort of like, not interested in a lot of things. It wasn't a very good family scene. And again, this drive I had in me, I don't know how I found him, but I reached out to him, and my mom said, yeah, go ahead. So my father flew me or put me on a Greyhound bus, I forgot which, from California by myself to West Palm Beach, Florida, Lake Worth. And I show up. He's married. He's got 2 kids from a previous marriage where he kept custody, and he has a child with her. So he's got 3 there, 1 kind of small, 2 very close in age, about 5 years or 6 years younger than me. And then I show up, 14, 15 years old. So now he got four kids, a teenager and all the way down, and his wife, she's only got 1 other than the 2 that he had when he met her that she took on. So she had to care for them, I suppose. But when I showed up, it started teetering the thing a little bit too much. I don't know whether he consulted her or what he did, but he was always good, because it was another time in my life when I was really small that I went to live with him, or visit him actually, and he didn't want me to go home. He wanted to keep me. And my mom and my stepfather at the time, who was raising me, they were like, no, they weren't having that. And so they came and got me. That's another story. But like I said, after the stepfather left, and I was by myself with my mom and my brother, and he was just getting into trouble, and I didn't want anything to do with that, and she was out a lot and doing her thing, and I just wanted, success. And it was really a godsend. So my father had me come to Florida, and I started in middle school, junior high school, and I found, the things that we did in the 70s. I got a 10-speed bike. I rode it to school every day. Everybody had bikes. We didn't have busing, and I don't even know if there was. Maybe there was, but I rode a 10-speed bike. I met friends, and somehow or another, the middle school, the junior high school, I think I only had, it was 7 and 8. I think I only had a little bit of 7 to go before I went into 8. And so it was maybe a year and a half or a year and a little bit that I was in junior high when I came to Florida. And then it was on to high school, which was right down the street, Lake Worth High School. Boy, has that school changed. They've built more buildings onto it. It's still there, but it was a whole different thing. And those were the days of all the memories of everything we talked about the other day on the 70s that I lived. I mean, the girls, the beach, the surfing, experimenting with things, playing football in school, sports, and all of that. And so freshman, and then we went to sophomore. And then what happened was, during my sophomore year and in my freshman year, it had been building up. The situation with my stepmother was eroding. It wasn't good chemistry. I didn't hate her. I don't think she hated me, but it just didn't. It's been so many years now, I can't remember. But I remember it wasn't good. It seemed like, and I might have been imagining this, that she was trying to get me in trouble, or if I didn't get good grades, and then I was made to feel, less than if I got a C or a D. I never got any Fs, but I was definitely not an A student. I got plenty of D's and C's in school. I just wasn't into school. I think I'm pretty smart now about a lot of things, but I wasn't good in school. I learned typing and my math and English and those kinds of things, but phys ed, sports, whatever. I can read, write. I'm not dumb. But there was just something about me. I think a lot of 70s kids, I knew a lot of them when I went to school, they got about the same kind of grades I did. So, come along when I turned 16, I took a driver's ed class. Couldn't wait for that in high school. You take driver's ed in school. Now you take a test, you become of age, you go to the DMV, maybe your parents teach you a little bit with their car, you get your restriction license. I got my restrictor license, meaning I could drive with someone that was in the car that was over 18, over 18 or 21. So, my dad was in the car business and he always had a brand new demo and he would let me drive when we would go out. I'd be asking him, can I drive? Can I drive? And he would let me. And I was a very good driver, like Rain Man. I'm a really good driver. And then when I got to be, I think I was 15, then when you become 16, you actually get your license where you can drive alone. There might have been some restrictions at night or whatever, but you could drive without somebody else in the car. And I remember, I'll never forget it, he brought home an SS or a Rally Sport Camaro, banana yellow, with the console, bucket seats, and he let me drive it. This is in the 70s. They made some pretty good motors in those days. They weren't like those cars in, much later years, all the smog stuff on them. And I would go over to John Prince Park. It's a big park over there, and I was cruising through and around over and over and over, who can see me, and just feeling so cool driving this brand new car. Came from nothing, when growing up with my mom and stepfather, we were, they were never going to be able to provide anything like that to me. And then one day, my dad, because he was in the car business, came home with a Delta 88, a 67 or I think it was a 67 Oldsmobile Delta 88 with a 455 in it. Two-door coupe, column shift, bucket seats, AM radio, radial tires, but in absolute new condition. And it was $500. I mean, he was able to get it in cheap on trade. Those were back in the days. He was the manager. And I was saving my money. I was a busboy. I was a dishwasher. I was a pot washer. We used to look in the newspaper for one-liner ads to get a job. And I would work weekends, part-times, nights, while going to school to make money. I still wanted to make money. I was always wanting to make money. And so I was saving, and he brought it home and said it was $500. I had to pay for it, and I was glad to get it. Unlike today, when people come home with cars to their kids and they say, or take them to buy a car and they're picky about the color. When my dad brought the car home, he said, "That's your car. I'm glad to get it." And I never will forget, too, during ownership of that Delta 88, I would go over to Lake Osborne, a couple of gals that I dated, and we'd sit there on the shoulder on the side of the road, like Lover's Point. But it wasn't like down a dirt road or anywhere spooky or scary. It was right on the drive around this lake that's right near the high school. And, we'd hold hands and kiss and whatever. And, those old radio tunes, if they came back, if I heard one now, it would take me back. It would really just take me right back. And it wasn't like an impressive Nova or Camaro, stuff like the varsity and the seniors were driving. They were, motorcycles, and, those guys were big and tough, and they were seniors, and we're still punks, right? We're just freshmen and sophomores. But nonetheless, I had my own car, and I'm feeling very grown up again, which is another step for me to really feel independent and grown up. And this is something that my real father, even though I said that he didn't raise me and my stepfather was a little closer with me, this is what he did for me, of which I appreciate. He also taught me all about fishing. My dad was a big fisherman. We went to the Bahamas on Compass, just Compass, to Freeport, which is only 60 miles off the Lake Worth Inlet. And we went over there together and came back. And man, he taught me a lot of stuff about diving, fishing, rigging baits, going out like that, backing the boat in. We did it all together. We come home, flush the engine, clean the boat. I mean, we were like a team. I had this, and then the stepmother, back to her, I think she was a little jealous of that closeness because I was the eldest, that he was enjoying, with his firstborn that he didn't raise, but he was able to teach him about the fishing and all that. And I just think that, that bothered her to some degree. And so, like I said, she was always, seemed like trying to get me in trouble, and he'd come home and she had sort of said something to him on the phone that day at work, and he had to come home and let's do this fatherly talk to me, like Leave It to Beaver days. And I didn't like that. It was like, oh, they're against me. And so I started feeling different. And I had this car. And this is the part of the story that I, have always been reluctant to share. I think I've already alluded to it. But anyway, I had this good friend of mine named Kenny. I won't give his last name. But Kenny, he seemed like not be real happy with his home either. But that was his mom and dad. He was raised by his own mom and dad. Born and raised. I mean, I think he was in that same house. But he was ready to fly the coop and go. So I had said, look, my mom is in California. We're down here in Florida. I mean, we couldn't go any further across the country, right? And so I said, my mom is out there and she'll take us in, and let's just run away from home and go to California. How can we do it? Let's put some money together. So I'm saving all my tip money I was getting. I was working at IHOP as a busboy. I was doing the graveyard shift, and the waitresses would tip me out at the end of the night. I'd bust their tables, and I was going down to the bank every morning with pockets full of change, and I'd put it at the teller window. I was depositing everything I could. I didn't want to spend anything to get this gas money, to get ready. And Kenny was doing the same. And so the time came, and what I did was I asked my father if I could drive my car to Lake Okeechobee here in Florida with Kenny and his family. They were going to go fishing, and Kenny and I wanted to drive, take my own car, and we were going to be, his parents were going, and we were going to be camping, I don't know, for 2 or 3 days, something to that effect. And he agreed, which nothing like that was ever going to happen. That was just giving us 3 days before they were even going to look for us. And we had no cell phones. There was no way to check on us. Just remembering that right now. That was probably one of the big deals there, how we got away with it. So we took all the money out of the bank, whatever I had, whatever gas cost at the time. And Kenny and I, we got cans of pork and beans and Spam and a cooler full of bread and bologna and mayonnaise. And we took turns driving, and we drove from Lake Worth, Florida to San Diego, California, I think 2.5, 3 days. It was record. We drove 24/7. One would sleep in the back, one was driving. And I don't know how we didn't get pulled over. Maybe the speed limit was 70 all the way across the country, but we were doing 80 at least. And that 455 could run. So 2 or 3 days go by, and I'm supposed to show back up at the house. There's no way to reach me. I don't have a cell phone or a beeper or anything like that. It didn't even exist. And he had no idea. Missing in action. Thinking about it now, maybe it worried him, like, what happened to us? But I don't even think he knew about Kenny. I don't even think he knew his parents. Thinking about it now, I don't even know if he ever put that together. I eventually let him know, once I got back to my mom's house that, I was with my mom, so it wasn't but 4 or 5 days later. But getting back to it, on the way over there, Kenny and I ran out of money and gas in Arizona, and we got another state to go to get into California. So we picked up this hitchhiker, and he said, if you go to this church, they'll give you these gas chits, these little gas coupon coins that you take to a gas station, And it's only good for gas, so you can't use it for drugs or beer or anything like that. And that's what I remember, and that's what we did. This hitchhiker knew about it, and he was, hitching a ride with us. And we said, "Well, you got any gas money? Because we don't have any gas." And we were able to, on fumes, roll into no money into San Diego to my mother's. I pulled into my mother's sister's house, where my mom was, my aunt, and of course, I can't remember now, but it was like, "Oh wow, who are you? What are you doing back?" or "Good to see you," or something like that. And I explained to her, "Hey, I'm a man now. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I left my father. I left you. I went to my father. I'm a man, and I got a car." I mean, it wasn't like that really, but I just, wasn't going to go back to school, and she wasn't going to enforce it either. So she was still doing her nothing life thing and living in these very poor apartments. And then I go over there. My friend Kenny, in no time, was shipped back to Florida because he started hanging out with my brother, who was the troublemaker, and they got in some kind of trouble, and the law came, found them, not where my mom lives, but wherever they were, whatever they were doing. And, Kenny's a minor, and they're like, "Well, where do you live?" And they're like, "Well, my parents were in Florida." So he was gone. Never saw him again. And I'm hanging out with my mom, and there was a woman that was 26 years old with 2 kids that lived upstairs from my mom in these not very nice apartment complex. And she looked out the window and saw me, and I was a 16-year-old, Florida, tanned. I had blonde hair down to here, long hair, 150, 60 pounds maybe, wringing wet, concave stomach, slim, thin. And she, liked what she saw. And before you know it, this 26-year-old, who's not too terribly old, certainly not to me now, but was 10 years older than me. Well, she ended up teaching me a few things, and I was in lust. I was definitely like, man, I've hit the big time. I go to Florida, quit school, run away. Mom is not really going to really enforce a lot of rules on me. I'm not going to go back to school. I meet this woman, and she's teaching me about, stuff, and I am like head over heels. And so we had a kid. And I was very, very young. And we were going to go live together. And then in the state of California, you remember when they used to call it shacking up? Well, some apartments and stuff, they didn't allow that. If you weren't married, you couldn't be shacking up. That was kind of like taboo. It wasn't like today where anything goes. So we said, "Don't worry, we'll get married." And found out I couldn't get married in California, even with parental consent at that age because of the different laws. But if you drove to Yuma, Arizona, to the Arizona line, you could with parental consent. And my mother gave consent because she was pregnant and going to have a child, and I wanted to marry her, and we wanted to be together, and so she agreed. Naturally, things didn't work out. I was maturing and growing up, and I started asking myself, what the hell am I doing? And so, within a year or two after my child was born, we separated. And I'll end the story with that because it goes on. And there was a reuniting, not of me and her, but of course with my child and all that. But it was a very young age to become a father with a woman and all of these things. But this is how fast I grew up. And remember, this woman that I married had 2 kids already. In fact, her eldest and I were closer in age than she and I were. Of course, she was just a child, but literally we were only 8 years apart, and my wife and I were 10 years apart. I know, crazy. So I started working, supporting her and the 2 kids, and then ours that came, and it got to be like, way overwhelming, way more on my plate than I can handle. So I, left that deal, and she met somebody else, and life went on with her, and life went on with me, to other amazing stories that it's really, I could write a book. It's just, I don't know too many people, but I've literally been working since I was a young boy, supporting women and raising children early on in my life, not in a long time, but I started out, I did the latter part of life first, and so, it is what it is. But yeah, I got married at 16, 17 years old, something like that, had child, and left school just before sophomore year ended, never returned to school, not just didn't finish like a senior year, but I didn't even go to junior or senior. But if you want to count it, I did 11 years because I got held back in the first grade, remember, because I didn't know my colors. I just make that up. But the street smarts, the common sense, the way I was taken under a lot of people's wings, the people that I esteemed, and God has always been in my life since I was real young. I've had a very close relationship as a child. I didn't go through this, I didn't know God until I was 20s. Most people when they're young, they sow in their oats, and they're kids, they don't like school, they don't know God, they don't want to hear about church. A lot do, but most don't. And, they don't have the maturity level yet. And they find Christ and God later. Not me. I think I got baptized at 5, 6 years old. I used to pray to get out of whoopings, and I never got them. And I knew there was a God. So between ambition, spirituality, God having a plan in my life, and whatever, just letting me do all of that has made me who I am now. And that's why this last thing in my life, and all the things in between that you don't know about, other stories that I have, were there for a season, but they were never meant to be like forever. And I would say that most people that are married now, or either were married before to somebody else, very few people are, unless you're older, or been married for 40, 50, 60 years. Most people either just got married, or they're getting ready to get a divorce, or they've been divorced, some a couple of times. So it's not unusual in that respect, but it's very unusual to get married at my age and not even finishing high school. And to be really working, getting a job, and wanting to do it, wanting to be money in my pocket, putting that above any kind of, I want to go to college and sow my oats and be a frat boy. No. I mean, forget that. So, anyway, what do you guys think about that? I don't have any regrets. It was hot. It was good. She was amazing, and I got an amazing child from it. And the experience of driving across country with Kenny, scared to death and excited at the same time. Washing those pots and pans, thinking about the trip, and saving every quarter and dime and nickel and penny and putting in the bank every day. When I was in school, meeting the guys and surfing at the beach and fishing on the pier and homecoming dances and meeting girls and, you know, losing your virginity and all the things that go along with some of that part of your life early on for some people. All very exciting. I mean, some of the best memories. I mean, I watched them build I-95 over there on the East Coast. It was a much, much cooler place, West Palm Beach, than it is today. I mean, it was really amazing to go from California, which was already cool, but because of my mom's situation and the financial situation that she had and the opportunities that were going to afford me weren't much. And then I came to live with my father, and he provided, you know, a room for me in the garage. We built the garage with the beads and the black light, and I had the friends, and he got me the car and all that. You know, I can hear some of the less than courteous people out there now that might want to use that against me, that, well, he did all that for you and then you ran away. Well, you know, he left my mother when I was, you know, 2 or 3. They split up. So he went his own way. He was a young man too. He was very young. Not as young as me, but not much older. And so he did that. And I kind of followed his footsteps. And believe it or not, of all the kids, my father, who's gone to be with the Lord, had, him and I are alike in every way, even our looks. But our ambitions, the way we feel about life, our curiosities, our willing to try everything, especially our ambitions and things, are just so close. And his name was Freddie. And when I used to go to visit my grandmother, his mom, on a farm in Alabama, and of course she's gone on to be with the Lord. She loved me to death. I would meet cousins every time I would go visit her that I never knew I had, you know, second, third cousins and all this. And their parents, my second and third aunts or great aunts or whatever they were, I get lost in all these, you know, relations that were hashed up. But they would say, Freddie Baker, you know, when they would look at me, if they just met me for the first time or hadn't seen me in a long time, that at my age, when they knew my father when he was a young boy, you know, that's how, and you've seen people that how they look like their father, and girls look like their mother, and you know, just a spitting image. And my father's other kids, I think they favor the mother more. But both my brother, the troublemaker, and myself look alike and favor my father the most, I think. But you know, I look back at it and hearing myself tell the story, it's kind of weird. I think I should post this. Hey, you know, it's out there now, and it's not such a terrible thing, but that's how I grew up. That's how I learned the ways of the world and how to be responsible and make money. And I didn't need to get. I even have a trade if I wanted to set tile. I mean, I know all about tile. I've probably forgotten more than I ever learned, but you know, at the time, you know, I could definitely be a helper. They don't do it the same way anymore. But other than that, I have no other, you know, trades or knowledge, and I certainly don't have a degree behind my name on anything. But I've got a whole lot of common sense and a lot of people skills, communication skills, and working with people. So, yeah, no, I got no regrets. I like my life pretty good. But what I was going to say a minute ago was, after that situation and in other relationships that I had along the way, up to my 66 years, I do believe that while they were all sad and painful when when one ended, if you've ever had your heart broken before, you've been through a divorce or even a boyfriend-girlfriend situation, it's kind of the same, just different people. But, you know, you give your heart into it and then it ends and you're like, well, what happened? You know, and you're used to somebody, and so that's happened to me. And that's kind of why I kind of tapped the brakes and went many, many years as a single person. I kind of really never wanted to experience that again. Of all the things in life to deal with, that to me, that's one of the toughest things. I can deal with a lot, but you know, those are always very similar and very. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. So here we are again, and moving towards the next chapter in life. It seems to be the book is opening and the pages are turning, and things will be coming. Things will be happening with this channel, I hope and pray, and things will be happening in my personal life one day. It's nothing I'm pushing. I've never done that. I don't want to do that. I don't even solicit it. I've never solicited it. It's always just kind of happened, and they come in very long, in between intervals. I can't sit here and say I've had so many, relationships, because I haven't. I really haven't. I'm quite competent and comfortable, by myself, and I'm also very comfortable and understand like old school way of being like the man in a relationship, and I'm very comfortable doing that. In fact, at this point in my life, I kind of would prefer that with the right one. It's just, but it's got to happen. It's just got to happen. I'm not going to go out and solicit it, sign up for it, run an ad for it. No, I don't believe that works. I think that it just has to happen. You can be looking at bananas in Publix tomorrow, and, maybe that's where it is. I don't know. But until then, I'm just going to simply crush it.